Hello and welcome to another episode of BioTalk. Finally, I think it's been about almost a year since the last time we were together.
Is it really?
But today we're talking about three-parent embryos again and genetic engineering, and we kind of introduced that a few episodes back, back when the FDA was considering reconsidering their regulations on it, and the UK was, and there's been some more developments since then. But just as a kind of introduction, let's kind of reintroduce, like, what are we talking about? What's this science that we're talking about? This three-parent IVF.
Well, a lot of people think that the only DNA that we have is inside the nucleus of our cells, and that's not true. We actually have organelles in the cytoplasm that produce our energy from the food that we eat, and they're called mitochondria, and they have their own DNA. They have a little circular piece of DNA that only has a few genes on it, and so that's actually outside the cell. Well, we get our mitochondrial DNA from our mothers because they're in the egg when it's fertilized. The sperm dumps theirs at fertilization. And so, a woman that has a mutation in her mitochondrial DNA can't help but pass that on to her offspring. So, and mitochondrial diseases can be very serious. Imagine having a faulty energy making system that can really mess with a lot of things. And it's actually, a lot of times these diseases are very systemic. They're everywhere. They cause all kinds of problems. So we understand the idea behind this technique is to, quote, cure or treat or, somehow make the mitochondrial disease go away. Right. And so what they do, there are a couple of different techniques. This one's the easiest one to understand and explain. So I'm going to explain this one. So what they do is they take the egg from a woman with mitochondrial disease. They remove the nucleus. They take that nucleus and put it into a donor egg that has normal mitochondria and that's had its nucleus removed. And then they do fertilization in vitro in a dish as normal. Okay. Right. So what you end up with is an embryo that has genetic material from three people. Right. The mitochondrial DNA from a donor, and then what we consider, the genetics of the mother and the father in the nucleus. Well, this then creates what we call a germline genetic modification. So any girl that is conceived with this technique can't help but pass that mismatch of mitochondrial DNA and nuclear DNA onto her offspring. And this will affect generation after generation after generation. Right. And this is actually very concerning, even though the idea of it is noble. Like we're trying to eliminate mitochondrial disease. First of all, this doesn't actually cure mitochondrial disease for the people that already have it. No. So this is just,
preventing
really
people with mitochondrial disease from being born.
Yeah. This is essentially a way to prevent people with mitochondrial disease from being born. That in and of itself is a problem, but the ripping apart of the egg and replacing the nucleus is very similar to cloning. Actually, right. It's almost exactly the same.
Right. Well, the other technique is almost even more like cloning.
Identical. Yeah. Where you have what you do in that technique is to create two embryos,
one with the bad egg, one with the good egg, and then
good egg. And then you take out the nucleus of the embryo that has the good mitochondria, and you plop in the nucleus of the other embryo. So essentially, this is like a cloning technique, creating children that would never exist naturally.
Right. Exactly.
And so these are absolutely genetically modified children. Yeah, there are GMOs, absolutely, and
exactly.
Yeah, they are GMOs, and with that invasive, tearing apart of the egg, there is tremendous risk that scientists are trying to scream to the top of the rafters that we may, eliminate, quote, mitochondrial disease here, but we may be introducing
something even
other,
worse,
even more serious birth defects
That's
because of this.
That was what was surprising to me, was how many scientists actually were coming out and warning about this. I mean, usually scientists are like, let us do whatever we want to do, but
no, there are actually quite a few who are even progressive. I would say I would call them progressive scientists.
Right. They're not like generally opposed to this morally,
No,
they just
some of them are, in the sense that they realize that there's really no ethical way to go about if this works.
But they wouldn't normally be. It's not like they're your typical pro-life. We're opposed to
absolutely not. Yeah, they are not. They're pro embryo research. But in this case, they are definitely seeing that these children are experiments.
Yeah.
The children are the experiment, and that there's really no way to do this without putting them at great risk, which is
unlike embryonic stem cell research. Like, this is a case where that's easier, I guess, for them to justify because you're still working with embryos. In this case, they're wanting to make children be born from this procedure. So it's different than embryo. You're experimenting on embryos in one case where we would equate that sort of thing. In this case, you literally are making born human beings experiments.
And not just one generation.
Right.
You're inflicting this on every generation after.
Right.
Which is why the United Kingdom decided that they were going to go ahead with this technique. It's the first time in human history where a government has sanctioned the germline genetic engineering of its citizens. Right. This is absolutely unprecedented.
They'd been kind of deliberating about it for a few years, I think. Yeah. And they had gotten public opinion. I mean, there was a time that the public could weigh in on it, I think, a couple of years ago. Yeah. And then just this past it was in January that the first vote, or was it February? No, it was February 5th, I think, where they voted in the House of Commons, and like an overwhelming majority. And then just a few weeks ago, the House of Lords kind of sealed the deal. So the two houses.
What's really disturbing about that is that this kind of engineering is actually against the law in the United Kingdom.
Oh, okay.
So they just changed the definition of genetic modification to accommodate this, so that they could push it through. Mm-hmm. Right?
Oh, well, that's what
they'd
they
have
do.
to change the law.
Okay.
So this is really like beyond Brave New World. Like, this is really kind of 1984 Brave New World kind of situation where you just change the definition of something to kind of push it through.
And they've been doing that. I mean, we've seen that in Missouri, like with the Amendment 2 and the cloning thing. You just change the definition of cloning, and all of a sudden it's not cloning anymore. And that's one of the things they've been doing here. I mean, and people will get confused because you'll see, it's now where before they're using the scientific term where, maternal mitochondrial spindle or whatever
maternal spindle transfer.
Yeah. But now they're just calling it mitochondrial donation.
Yeah. Which is a total misnomer because the mitochondria aren't changing places.
No.
It's the nucleus that's changing places. So it actually is totally the wrong terminology, because it's really a nucleus donation is what it is. Exactly. Or a nucleus replacement. And if we called it that, then I think there would be more problems. So they just basically said this isn't genetic modification, even though it is.
Right.
And it's the same thing as a kidney or blood transplant, which is totally not, because those aren't passed on to future generations.
No.
Okay. So basically, they just changed everything because they want to go through with it. And that's what's the most disturbing, is that everyone says that there's no slippery slope here. We're going to stop here. Well, if you just change the definition to what you want, then everything's possible.
Well, yeah, that was, I don't know if you saw this. It was in a Life Site News article, actually, but it was an interview with one of the directors of one of the pro-life groups over in the UK, Paul Tully. from the Society for the Protection of Unborn Children, and he told, this was just an interesting quote to me, I mean, just a telling quote to me, where he said, until now, the researchers had to destroy cloned embryos. But this regulation allows them to move one step closer towards full-scale human cloning, because it's the changing of the definition, and now other research this affects other research they were doing.
Yes.
Besides just
essentially, if you're going to change the definition of genetic engineering to exclude this, then it also excludes cloning, essentially.
Right? And you don't, because whereas like in some of the laws they were trying to get changed, in Missouri and stuff, where they made the law where you had to destroy the embryo. That was the law, and I guess that's kind of the way it was in the UK. But now with this new definition, they don't have to destroy the embryo, and we all know they don't want to always destroy the embryo.
No, they don't, and so this is a precedent that is unheard of. Never before.
Exactly.
And this is what's upsetting, is that the FDA still hasn't really decided definitively whether or not the United States is going to go forward with this. At this point, they've said no.
They've kind of put it on pause. They've put their decision on hold, is from what I understand.
And the thing that's most disturbing to me is that one of the scientists that wants to do this here, and I won't even try to butcher his name, he's an Oregonian scientist with this crazy name, who also developed that technique here. He wants to use this not for the children, but for the parents. So let's focus on the intent behind it. In the UK, the intent is to help children, essentially. Whether or not they're actually doing that is another story. That's the objective, is to help the child. So they've deemed that the risk to the child outweighs the benefit to the child. In other words, the risk of this technique, is small enough in comparison to the reward of eliminating mitochondrial disease in the genetic line. Okay. Well, this guy in Oregon wants to use it to help infertile couples conceive. So do you see how that immediately changes? The child has to bear all the risk, and the parents, none, right? That's bad medicine. I'm sorry, but you don't do invasive procedures on a person for parental desire.
Exactly.
Okay? That is just not, and that is what it would be. I mean, infertility is a disease, but the parents are not bearing the brunt of their, physically bearing the brunt of those choices. It's the child. And let's be honest, if a child is developing abnormally in the womb, they're going to be very carefully monitored. And if things are going wrong, I pretty much guarantee that abortion is going to be the fail-safe.
Exactly. It will.
Yeah, it will. And so we probably won't know about the quote failures in this technique because it won't be reported.
Right.
I'm sure that we're not. In the UK, they might track that kind of thing, but in the United States, we would never know about that.
And, I hate to get stuck on numbers. It's not like it's worse because there's more life loss or whatever, but every time I go, I just get deeper into these issues, and like just the numbers tally up in my head, of human life that we're just experimenting on, destroying. I mean, it's gonna, that's why Zachary Gappa, he's with the John Jay Institute Center for a Just Society, and he wrote an article early in January, and what he said was really, I mean, that's what's been in my mind as I've been dealing with these issues and writing about these issues and just learning about these issues, where he said, pro-lifers will lose the next stage of this argument unless they get more informed, because he says the graphic abortions we've known over the past few decades will soon largely be a thing of the past, but we may be killing more unborn children than ever before. Yeah. I mean, when you think about just the experimentation and what needs to happen, even just to get one child born from some of these procedures, it's multiple embryos. And then when the child's not developing right, then, that's more.
Well, and then the women who have to donate the eggs, So you're
Yeah.
exploiting the women,
Right.
the young women for their eggs, okay, putting their fertility and their lives at risk. Then you've created a precedent where a child is the experiment.
Right.
So how far do we go there? I mean, we've already did that with IVF, essentially. That turned out okay, so we don't really see that as experimentation
Well, it
anymore,
turned out
even
okay.
though it still is. Quote, it turned out okay in our public mind.
In our public
It's
mind.
not necessarily turned out okay. We're not paying attention to the massive loss of life that's happening there. The creation, the mass destruction, the manipulations that go on in the IVF clinic. We totally turned a blind eye to that, which is on us. We really should. And this is the fruit of that, ignoring what goes on in the fertility clinic. This is now the fruit of that. We're reaping the fruit of not really defending life at its earliest stages, at the very earliest, not just fetus stage, but at the embryo stage. So this is very scary. I really feel like this is because the United States does not have any legislation on this. I mean, the UK at least had some. They decided to circumvent it and go around it, but at least they had something. We have nothing. All we have is an FDA that really hasn't decided what they want to do yet.
Right.
And so as pro-lifers, there's a lot we can do. The first thing is we really have to vote for pro-life candidates. I mean, I think that's a big one.
Well, pro-life, not just anti-abortion candidates.
But actually truly pro-life. Because, and even if we think that doesn't matter because the abortion thing we think is unwinnable, there are so many more things that we need to focus on. At least if they're pro-life in some sense, they're going to at least stop and ask themselves, is this the right course of action? And someone who's not may just not even consider the ramifications of what it is that we're doing. So that's really important. And we also need to be very vocal. I know that these are difficult concepts. It's hard to make people understand. Believe me, no one knows better how difficult it is to present a difficult topic in a way people can understand than I do. Okay. Right. Every blog post, I don't blog so often because every word matters. I understand the difficulty of that. But that doesn't absolve us from that responsibility.
Well, I think if you just pay attention, seek out the articles and then there are some trusted sources that you can go to if you have questions. Obviously, your blog, I try to be as informative as I can on mine. There is the Center for Bioethics and Culture Network and Wesley Smith's blog.
Yes. Even the Huffington Post actually has done several opinion pieces on this. So if you have some left-leaning friends, you can find places that they would some outlets that they would listen to. So the National Catholic Register, I think you were going to say.
Or the National Catholic Bioethics Center.
Another
one that somebody else listed was the New Atlantis.
Yeah, I think there's the New Atlantic. As I don't know if those are different.
One of the two. And then the Oxford Christian Bioethics Journal was one of them.
Yeah. There's a lot of really great stuff out there.
There is. But the key is I need to keep educating myself because, the science, while the basic principle is the same, like we don't want to manipulate and destroy human life, the science changes and we need to know about that because they are, like what we were saying before, they are changing the language, just to confuse things and make otherwise, atrocities sound more appealing and less harmful. So we need to stay kind of up to speed on that because if we don't know the language has changed, we don't know that mitochondrial donation is still the
essentially cloning still
that we were talking about
close.
A year ago.
Yeah. And also I want to say too that it's really important that we understand that this isn't the same as what we've seen before. This is a different level.
Right.
This is germline genetic engineering that is going to affect generations. Okay. The stakes are very, very high, and this is a step. This isn't just your ordinary embryo experimentation. Okay. this is genetic modification.
Right. This you can't revert to the old embryonic versus adult stem cell thing. We're on a whole new level.
This is a totally different, and you'd be surprised at how many people on both sides of on all ends of the political spectrum and everything in between will agree that if we don't like genetically modified organisms in our food, then we really should not be messing with our children.
Exactly.
Okay. I mean, because we really don't know enough yet. Right. Essentially, if we can do some mitochondrial fixes, not as in the embryo so that it's not germline, but in adults,
right,
where we can fix their problems, that is totally acceptable. Okay. Or, in individuals who can consent to that. That is absolutely something we should do, but we should not be messing with embryos in a germline fashion where we have no idea what the outcome is going to be. And because we're basically giving them the same sentence their mothers had. In other words, if they are born with, a genetic defect, they're going to then pass that on too. So, we're really not fixing anything here. We're just kind of playing around and seeing what happens. And I think that's exactly what we're doing. And we've sanctioned that now. Yeah. It seems overwhelming, but I think if every person just shared one article about this, basically said we are creating genetically modified children, just one, in their Facebook or Twitter or whatever, just one.
You go to
imagine what we could do. This is urgent. This is not something we can just kind of sweep under the rug and hope will go away, because it's not going to go away. In fact, I really feel like this is a pivotal point in human history. Like, this is absolutely a moment that we will look back on as a moment for the history books, a big one.
Right.
Because this is where we decided that we can consent for future generations and experiment on them.
Right.
And that's a huge precedent. Right. I cannot stress enough how important this is.
Exactly. Well, and any information you want, just go to my website, reflectionsofaparalytic.com. Mary Meets Dolly is Rebecca's website. And just go to our websites and just start reading, find articles.
Start reading. There's a lot of really good stuff that I've linked to, especially on this. Huffington Post articles, open letters from scientists who are very progressive, videos, that kind of thing that educate people. And if you just share even just one of those, you don't even have to share our stuff. Just find something, share it on Facebook and go, hey, did you guys know this was going on? And you'd be surprised. I think we can really make a huge difference, so that when the FDA does decide to revisit this issue, you've got a citizenry that has decided that they know what this is, and that they're not going to, we don't want this. We don't want this kind of experimentation.
Great. Well, thanks for joining me again, and we will hopefully have another one up for you in not too long. And hopefully we won't be waiting another year to do the next one.
Absolutely.
Thanks.